after nearly 20,000 hours of providing individual and couple psychotherapy, the biggest word that kept showing up was this word called connection.
Even growing up, there was this desire to connect, but what is that? What does that mean?
All we really want in this life is to be seen, heard, known. Connecting to something greater is really crucial for our experience of being alive. Sometimes we pretend that we feel a connection because we don't want to be left out. Most of the ailments have within it an aspect of disconnection. Depression. Oftentimes we're disconnected from the present because we're ruminating about the past. Connection. It's at the heart of everything. It's the precursor for everything. Authentic connection is what we're looking for in this dash between our birth date and our death date.
So I had the distinct honor of downloading your book on Audible since last we spoke and diving into it. And I love it. It's like a personal addiction right now. So I can't wait to share just like how much it's already impacted me listening to it. But it just drives that question home even more that we were chatting about when we first started talking, which is what prompted you to create Super Psyched and share it with the world?
Yeah, Amber, I mean, you know that when we invest heartbeats in a book, and I know you've done the same, and I've got your book downloaded and chomping at the bits to get into it. Chomping at the bit, I guess it's more singular, but regardless.
Maybe you have more than one.
Maybe I have more, maybe I have bits to chomp on. Who knows?
Exactly.
I had been waiting for a book to take a hold of me. Irv Yalom, who is one of the most important contributors to modern psychotherapy, is an existentialist, and he was at Stanford, and he's 93 now, and he's retired. But he wrote tons of books, including Love's Executioner and many textbooks, and it was just huge MVP. He said that every book he wrote bit him in the ass, and I was waiting for a book to do the same with me. I was waiting for that book to take hold, that idea, and it just wasn't coming. I'd started a few, I didn't finish them, and then after nearly 20,000 hours of providing individual and couple psychotherapy, I noticed that the biggest word that kept showing up was this word called connection. And in my interviews on my own podcast, connection with all the thought leaders. And yet, if you look up connection in the dictionary, it's a very lackluster definition. It's when two things are connected, whether they're objects, ideas, or people. Mm-hmm. Okay, whatever. Don't think that's what they're talking about here. You look it up in the APA definitions, and the American Psychological Association hasn't even defined connection, except for the fact it's so interesting that if you go through the DSM, which is our diagnostic Bible that we use in mental health, and I shouldn't say it so casually, it's really a very fine tome that helps us get really granular about diagnoses, which is very, very helpful from the medical model. Most of the ailments have within it an aspect of disconnection. Let me just even bust it out. Depression. Oftentimes we're disconnected from the present because we're kind of ruminating about the past. That is a common feature of depression. A common feature of anxiety is we're future tripping. We're not in the present because we're disconnected from it, because we are thinking about a future that may or may not happen. To borrow from Mark Twain, I've lived through thousands of catastrophes, most of which never happened. So we're disconnected from the present. With trauma itself, dissociation is a common hallmark of trauma, including PTSD. And if you talk about heavy duty psychosis, which is a break from reality, well, that is disconnection from reality. So if at the heart of everything that we don't want is disconnection, it seems logical to suggest, and it's been my clinical and own personal experience, that everything we do want is connection. And it's at the heart of everything. It's the precursor for everything. When I met with you for the very first time, Amber, of course, you and I were both asking ourselves, consciously or unconsciously, is there a connection here? Is there something going on? Is this going to be good? When we listen to music, we're asking ourselves, do I feel connected to it? Sometimes we pretend that we feel a connection to it because we don't want to be left out, but we feel the inauthenticity when we say, oh yeah, I love that artist, when we really don't. So an authentic connection is what we're looking for in this dash between our birth date and our death date. No one has negated this idea. And so I decided to take on the task of defining connection, because the definitions really were lackluster at best. And in so doing, I basically brought on 10 other licensed mental health practitioners to help me co-create a working definition. And bottom line, spoiler alert, it's when we come alive, it's life force. You know it when you've got that connection. That's what the pages of describing connection include. And I didn't want to just look at connection like connect. There are books on connecting with your spouse, connecting with your children, connecting with your clients. But what about just connection in and of itself? What about the ways we connect with ourselves? Almost imagining kind of an archery target with the bullseye being ourselves. The next ring would be connecting with others. And the ring outside that would be connecting with the world. The world could include things like our work, it could include art, it could include nature, our ancestry. And then in the fourth circle, it's connecting with something greater. For religious people, it might mean connecting with their religion. For the most orthodox atheist, going to the Grand Canyon, which I know is not very far from you, and they say, wow, well, they're probably experiencing awe. Awe is a sign that something greater is transpiring. And in our brains, when we experience awe, it's very similar in terms of the presentation of our neurochemicals and the physiological presentation as when we ingest psilocybin, the psychoactive component to magic mushrooms. We become less self-focused, we become more other-focused. So connecting to something greater is really crucial for our experience of being alive. So it's the four ways we connect is what I had gotten into. And I would even go so far as saying that you and I, Amber, as we connect, are doing what Martin Buber described as I and thou. It's not an I and it experience. You and I are seeing each other as spiritual beings who have feelings and our own experiences. We're treating each other with that kind of kindness, compassion, and respect.
Have you ever felt that way? That you are trapped in a cycle of negative thoughts that you just cannot escape from? It can feel like a complete uphill battle. And that's why I wrote Silence Your Inner Critic. This book is a way to begin to chip away at those negative thoughts, to find your way through that negative brain bias that can make you feel like there is no winning. You can take steps proactively to begin to reprogram those negative thoughts in a fun way, in an adventure that is heroic. This book has an epic quest that's a superhero adventure between your villainous inner critic and your inner hero that is your inner champion. It's fun, interactive, and I will be your gal in the chair all the way along. So, if you're ready to embark on this epic journey and chip away at that 98%, then head on over to silenceyourinnercritic.com, place your order, and begin to receive all of the bonus content that you'll get for being one of the early adopters. Again, that's silenceyourinnercritic.com. Place your order and begin to receive tons of fun and engaging content to get you started on your epic journey today. And to be able to explore that, because I agree, even growing up, there was this sense of I desire to connect, but what is that? What does that mean? And if you grow up in a family where you feel connected, but you don't even know what that is, and maybe your parents grew up in you are to be seen and not heard. And so there's that disconnection of we're connected, but we're not connected. And that gets passed down generationally, generation to generation. And so you feel this connection, but there's also a disconnection. It gets very confusing. And then there's nothing to refer back to for what is it supposed to look like. So now we're incredibly confused because there's no north, there's no way to know. And that's what I'm finding very profound as I'm listening to your very soothing voice
Oh,
in this book, because I feel like it gives that opportunity for me to go, oh, okay, this is giving a direction. You're not telling me what north is. You're giving me a direction where I can determine what my north is, but at least directionally, I have an idea.
You nailed it. I want everybody to find their unique connection formula. Nature does not provide replicas. Nature provides originals. You and I are both human, and yet we are entirely original. There's certain things that you and I share in common. We both love Star Wars. I'm
Yes.
guessing the first time you saw it and I saw it, and you saw Darth Vader walk into the room and take that guy by the neck, you and I were probably both terrified. And I remember it clearly when I first saw it. I thought, I have just seen the worst thing I will ever see. Whatever George Lucas created in that character. It went right into the collective unconscious. It went right to the quick. I felt it. But you and I have probably certain ways that we connect that are similar, certain ways that we connect that are very different. And we might take, what, wow, really? That works for you? How cool. And each of us, therefore, I believe, has our own connection formula, I call it. My wife and I have a lot in common, but she and I have a lot of things that are not quite in common. She will, as I told you offline once, she will not sit with me and watch Star Wars. She's not into it. It's probably not going to be her thing in this lifetime, no matter how much I try to explain how awesome it is. It probably is going over deaf ears, and I should just shut up and stop trying to sell her on it. I think I pretty much have. But so what we want in this dash between our birth date and our death date is to feel as connected as possible. We know what it feels like not to feel connected, when we feel lonely, when we go into a room where we know no one, or when we've flown into a long, far distant city. We get to the car rental desk and the person's on their phone and they're not even looking up at us because whatever's going on their phone is far more interesting than we are, and we're exhausted and we just want to be seen. We just want to be heard. And that's all we really want in this life, is to be seen, heard, known. We obviously don't need to be known by the person at the car rental place, but at least an acknowledgement of our existence would be nice. And it feels so good when we fly to that distant town and we get to the car rental place and the person looks at us and gives us a full smile and says, hello, welcome to Hertz or whatever, Alamo, wherever you're renting the car. The felt difference is so different, and the felt experience is so different, and that's because of our desire to connect. One last idea: if you haven't yet seen it, it's only a 3-minute long video, and it is life-changing. It is called the Still Face Experiment. Have you seen this thing?
No, I haven't.
Okay. As soon as we're done, I want you to watch this. It's 3 minutes long. It takes place at Mass Gen in Harvard. There's a fellow by the name of Dr. Edward Tronick who decided to do an experiment to see what it would be like for a toddler, and in this case, their mom, to, you see them connected. They're not really verbal, it's cooing and facial expressions and hands. And what Dr. Tronick does is he has the mom at one point turn her head back about 90-ish degrees and then return with a still face. Just what I'm doing on that Amber can see and you might not be able to see is I'm just giving no expression, a wooden face. The daughter immediately notices something's wrong. She's maybe a year old. And she starts to try to re-engage her mom and bring back, homeostasis, what she'd known before. She starts using her hands. She starts using her voice, doing everything in her little 1-year-old body's power to bring her mom back to what was, to connection. And soon you see the daughter just lose it. And it's horrifying. And then you see the mom resume the old position of connection. And within seconds, they're back. And so what you see is, in a very primal level, what disconnection and connection looks like. And what, in this case, I would say connection, disconnection, and reconnection. And a lot of this book actually talks, when we're talking about connecting with others, is the idea of feeling connected with others and possibly feeling disconnected, and how do we reconnect as well? Because that's a skill that they did not teach us in school. They gave us all kinds of stories about, and I talked about this also, what are little boys made of, snakes, snails, puppy dog tails, and girls are made of sugar and spice and everything nice, and forgive and forget. And what was the other great witticism that they taught us? Oh, sticks and stones may break our bones, but names will never hurt me. It turns out
Mhm.
names and words hurt like maybe even worse than sticks and stones from time to time. So I guess what I'm driving at is we weren't taught the right things, and especially as it relates to possibly the most important currency at our fingertips, and that is connection. And I hope to. This is by no means a definitive book. There's so many things I could not include in the book. There's so many things that after hitting send on the book to my publisher that I realized afterwards, oh my gosh, would have been so cool if I'd included this. But Leonardo da Vinci said it best when he said, art is never finished, only abandoned. And that was the same with my manuscript. I'm guessing the same would be true for yours. I'm sure there were a lot of things that you would write, P.S. Here are some things I kind of didn't include because I'm human and I couldn't include everything. And even AI can't include everything. But let's just say this is hopefully a conversation starter to get us really focused on what I believe is the most important currency, and that would be connection.
I agree. And as for what you couldn't include, what great bonus
Mm,
material, right? Or follow-up books. There's all kinds of ways to deliver it later.
I love that idea, Amber, and I've been thinking about that. So hopefully that will come to pass.
Yes. And things just continue to shift as this message resonates with individuals like me who are listening and we're like, okay, yes, yes, this is, I feel this. And as I'm creating what is true for me from this, now I have all of these questions, Dr. Dorsay. Help me. Help me with these questions that I have, which will in many ways inform you of those that you're assisting. So that's true connection,
Mm,
right? You're assisting us, then we're going to be feeding back to you to say, wow, you've just profoundly shifted
mm,
my perspective and what's been unfolding in my life. Now, how do I take this next step?
exactly. And I don't know if this is a rhetorical question because, yeah, exactly. That's right.
Not a rhetorical question at all. And there are so many next steps for so many of us because, as you pointed out, there are so many ways that disconnection shows itself in
Mm.
our world and even in our life. So, are you willing to dive in? I know that there are multiple steps that you talk about, even within your book, about connection and how that process you kind of walk through, but also how it appears in our lives sometimes and how that impacts not only us, but the people around us.
Well, let's start with this gorgeous structure that exists between both of our ears, and it's known as the human brain. It's been pretty much unchanged for at least 35,000 years. Some estimate as many as 100,000 years. And yet, our external realities have changed dramatically. The brain pretty much has just two directives. It's here for us to survive and to conserve energy. And sometimes that gets in the way of connection. Now, we are social creatures. We have been wired over the years to connect. And yet, there are so many little bugs in this brain of ours that basically causes us to disconnect. Big one is we can't help it. We engage in social comparison. We drive up next to somebody at a red light. We size up their car. We look at ours. We ask ourselves, where do we fall on the hierarchy of cars? um, we go on social media and see that somebody looks like, oh my gosh, they've got it so together. Oh my gosh. And they're in Hawaii with the happiest family in the world. And they're just like the Von Tropps. They've got it all together and they're perfect in every which way. And my house is just a train wreck. Little do we know that the family has just been fighting and they just got it together for the photo and they resumed fighting immediately after. We never know. Do we to use something from the 12 steppers, they say don't judge anybody's outside by your inside, or inside by their. I'm saying it wrong. Do you know how they say it, Amber? I'm forgetting how they say it, but it's really good.
I don't, but
Um,
you can kind of get the idea.
I'm
You
saying it
don't
very
know.
badly.
Like a snapshot of a moment by
Right.
no means tells you what's actually going on in the flow of the timeline for them.
Exactly what I'm trying to drive at. Some of the listeners know this aphorism from the 12 Steppers, and I am embarrassed that I kind of had a belly flop on that one, but that's part of the deal of being human.
It is.
But let's get into some of the other things that can disconnect us. FOMO, fear of missing out. Patrick McGinnis, who actually invented the word FOMO, he's been on my podcast. He wrote a book called FOMO Sapiens. We engage in FOMO all the time. Like a few weeks ago, I actually had to do something that turned FOMO on its head. I had tickets to go see a brilliant comedian. And my sister told me, dude, this is going to be legendary. You gotta go. And I didn't want to miss out. So I bought the tickets. And that night, I really had a strong hit. I wanted to be with my wife and son. I didn't want to miss out on that. So I chose to miss out on the comedian, and I experienced the opposite of FOMO, which is JOMO, the joy of missing out. And I doubled down on it. The three of us had a really good time. Did I miss an epic comedic performance? Absolutely. Did I decide to invest my heartbeats elsewhere and double down on it and love it? Yes, I had joy of missing out. So one of the things I would ask people is there can be joy in missing out. How many times have you gone to something because you were experiencing the possibility of the threat of FOMO made you go, and then you got in your car afterwards and said, that was a really crappy use of my evening. That happens to us all. Some other aspects that can get in the way are these little blue lighted things that we carry on our pockets, and they're calling to us. They are these smartphones. Oh boy, are they attractive. Let's go lose ourselves in a rabbit hole of Reddit or social media or wherever. And lo and behold, my gosh, we've just lost 2 hours of time. So if we actually looked at how we use time when we're on autopilot, we might be disgusted and we say, we're so busy, busy, busy. Yeah, we're busy. But how much of our time are we actually squandering? How much of our time are we using on autopilot? How often on a Saturday morning might some of us, self included, wake up, brew up some coffee, pet the dog, open some snail mail, turn on the TV, get something streaming going, start folding the laundry, start answering emails, look at social media, respond to text, doing all of these things at once. And then when Monday rolls around, we ask ourselves, why don't I feel rejuvenated? Well, the reason we don't feel rejuvenated is because the things that actually rejuvenate us often require a little bit of activation energy. The brain likes things that are easy. It's a cognitive bias. We go for what's easy. And pumping up the tires for my bike and putting on the bike rack and putting the bike on the bike rack and figuring out where we're going to take them, that takes planning, that takes physical labor, that takes activation energy. There's a cost to entry. We don't like that. But the the truth is, on the other side of doing something like that, we tend to feel awesome. I have a little measure that I call the drive away test. When you have an activity or when you're meeting with a friend, how do you feel when you drive away after having done that activity or having hung out with that friend? That will tell you a lot. Do you feel taller? Do you feel like, wow, that was a good use of time? Or do you feel smaller? Do you feel exhausted? Do you feel like, my gosh, what was I doing? We want to spend more time doing the things that allow and hanging out with the people who allow us a really positive drive-away test.
I love that. There is this sense, like almost as though your shoulders pull back and you can feel the energetics of it. And I've noticed that even in my life, there are those interactions or even environments. As much as people, there are places that make you feel almost energized.
Oh
So that's
yeah.
a great test.
And I talk a lot about friendship. Friendship is really interesting to me. I've got this great friend. I talk about him a lot. His name is Bob. His only downside is he lives 2 hours away from me. And what we'll do is we'll have these kind of, we call them mandates. We hang out in the city, which is halfway between each of our houses. City meaning San Francisco. And oftentimes we'll meet on a Saturday and I'll be like, ugh, I don't want to drive to the city. What am I thinking? And then, oh, parking sucks here. I forgot just how much parking sucks. Ah, Bob, why do you live so far away? And then I park my car and I get to Cafe Greco where we always meet. And I see Bob, and the next 4 or 5 hours, however long we spend together, goes by like that. I get back in my car. I am easily 2 inches taller. Obviously, not literally. And I say to myself, this was the best use of time ever. Another sad thing, I've got another buddy. I think about him all the time, Jed Goldstein. He lives out in South Orange, New Jersey. Damn it.
Oh,
3,000
wow.
miles away. It's been 9 years since we hung out in person. And I just came to realize at this rate, I'll see him 5 more times before I die. Assuming, a nice centenarian life is in the future in my cards. So I could be exactly. Thank you. I appreciate that, Amber. So I've dedicated myself, and Jed and is totally on board, that we will be meeting by Zoom at least quarterly. And it's so important that we do this because my driveway test with Jed, he's the brother I was meant to have. He's like my little brother. Bob's in many ways a big brother. But Jed is definitely like, oh my gosh, he was one of the greatest gifts that has ever entered my life. And just so much fun. And we get each other, and it's magic. And I don't want to have just 5 more hangouts with him. I need to at least have 4 hangouts a year where we see each other's face. I'm also a big proponent of Stevie Wonder's song, I Just Called to Say I Love You. A lot of people have forgotten that the phone can be used to be a phone. And a lot of people have forgotten that you don't have to have a reason to call your friend. You can just call to say I love you. And even if it means getting their voicemail, just leave that voicemail. You will feel better. They will feel better. Friendship matters. And if you are in a primary significant other relationship, to borrow from Esther Perel, we used to live not very long time ago either in villages where we had multiple people to serve multiple roles. Somebody to go maybe hiking with, somebody to go build things with, somebody to grow gardens with, somebody to go hunting with, somebody to fix things with, somebody to play cards and drink with. Now we expect our spouse to fill all of those roles. And as I mentioned earlier, my wife will not watch Star Wars with me. And there are things that she wants to do that I'm not super down to do with her. And it's necessary for our significant others to not feel the pressure to fill all of those roles. Our marriages or our long-term relationships will fare much better if we have other people to fill those non-romantic roles, unless you're in a polyamorous relationship, and that I don't discuss that because that's not my lane. I don't know much about it. But what I am talking about here is in a monogamous relationship where we only lean on that, and that's literally our only point of contact, and everything else is peripheral at best. It's not good for the relationship.
Yes. It's hard when in a connection we anticipate that connection will be everything. We're putting all the weight on one point in our lives, and anything is going to crush under all of the weight if we really think about it.
That's my,
how challenging would that be? I couldn't handle all of the weight. I have such an amazing fiance, and I know that if he put everything he desired out of a connection onto me, I can't be everything to him all of the time, not and do anything else in my life. So yes, 100% yes, especially when we're talking about connections.
Absolutely. And as you know, I'm bonkers for my wife, and I think she is about me as well. At least I have evidence to support that idea. And we cannot do that. So really, I think about that movie a lot. I don't know if you've ever seen it. I Love You Man, starring Jason Segel and Paul Rudd and the great Rashida Jones.
Yes.
It's this bromance film. It's a Judd Apatow film, and some people just see it as crass, but I saw it as deeply, deeply psychological and very sophisticated and profound even. You see Paul Rudd, he's about to marry Rashida Jones, and she has all these friends. And he realizes that she's going to have like bridesmaids coming out her ears, and he has no one. And then you see a relationship, a friendship ensue between him and Jason Segel, and it's just beautiful. And one of the things that Paul Rudd bemoans is there's no real book on how to make friends. I mean, how many of us have moved multiple times? Like, very typical patient I see in my office. I don't call them patients or clients. I call them people I see. But irrespective, let's use the word patient just to keep it easy. A patient was born in Ohio, was educated on the East Coast, had their first job in Texas, and then came to Silicon Valley and settled down here and started hitting it out of the park and ascended the corporate ladder and had the wife and the kids and the blah blah blah. And they come in and they say, yeah, every place I lived, I always intended to keep my friends, but every time I left, I always, promised them, and they promised me we'd stay in touch, but we didn't. And now the people I hang out with are, the parents of my children's friends, and I have nothing in common with them, but we hang out and we try to talk. We talk about safe things like sports and tech and politics, but it's not really that meaningful. The bond is not really sufficient. And there's not much kind of interpersonal safety. We don't really take steps to deepen the relationship. It just kind of stays rather static. So one of the big things that I'm trying to get people to do is to grow their friendship circle. It's never too late. Different friends are like different superheroes. Some of them, they all have, super strengths and limitations. Some of them might be really good at helping you move, but might not be good at helping you with something emotional. Some of them might love watching sports with you or playing cards or games, and they might not really be all that down to go for hikes with you. Appreciate your friends for what they've got and accept them for what they don't got as well.
Yes. And you learn about yourself through every one of those, I would offer as well.
So true. Harville Hendricks one of the most internationally renowned relationship experts, says that all learning transpires through relationships. So he literally said that. So I think, yes, is what I'd have to say.
So key. And so much of this, if someone has the ability to get your book, is Super Psyched, which is phenomenal. Can't recommend it enough. And I'm only halfway through, so I can't imagine it just continues to get better and better the deeper you go. But along with that, you also have the podcast, Super Psyched, right?
Yes.
So can you share with those who are listening, how can they get into your fold? And they've touched on it listening to our conversation up to this point, but it sounds like you have a plethora of ways to come in and continue to just learn from you and absorb all of this awesomeness and soak in the knowledge share. So if you can, since people are tuned in and listening, let's give them a little ear candy and know how they can get a hold of you.
I'd love to. And I'm just going to even take it a little bit further back and just explain the roots of the word super psyched.
Yes.
When I was in high school, I was in a garage band, and the drummer named me, I was the bass player. He named me Enthusiasm, and I thought that was a pretty funny name. You folks might remember in 2020, something happened. I think it was called COVID. And I started a podcast because I didn't have the time constraints of needing to drive my kids to school. My father very wisely said to me, "Hey, Adam, start your podcast." And I was thinking about the name, and Super Psyched is kind of connected to enthusiasm. But it's not just being super psyched and happy all the time. It meant super connected to our psyches. Because whether you're super happy or maybe in a grief-stricken process, being connected to our psyches is one of the best ways we can go through life. That's part of the way that we connect to ourselves. So I started this podcast, and it was so much fun speaking with really, really smart people and just having these incredibly geeky and vital conversations. And it's been a blast. I just hit 250 episodes of last week. And how people can find me is, thank you, is on my website, www.dradamdorsay, DradamDorsay.com. You can find me on LinkedIn. I am also on Facebook and a little bit on Instagram. I have really got some work to do over there. My kids are always getting on me. Come on, Dad. Instagram's where it's at, man. So I'm a little bit behind on that. No TikTok or Twitter, but the other places, hit me up. I love being I love being in contact with people, just hearing what they think, and if they have any connections to keynotes, I always love giving those. I'm also on YouTube a fair amount, including 2 TEDx talks, one on men and emotions. It's called Emotions, the Data Men Miss. And the other one is called, actually, it's about friendship and adulthood, what we were just talking about. So I'm pretty findable.
That's awesome.
And of course, the book is available at Amazon and Barnes and Noble, of course.
So anywhere they find books. And given that we're talking to an international audience, is it available internationally? They can get it wherever they are in the world?
I wish it were so, not yet. And I do speak Japanese and Spanish, and my big goal is to get to do a book tour in Japan or Spanish speaking countries. That would be amazing. But as of yet, that is in process. We'll have to wait for that.
Well, right now, I'm not set to go to Spanish-speaking countries or Japan, but you're always welcome to come with me to India and Bangladesh.
Wow, how cool. You're going to
So,
India and Bangladesh? I'd be
yes.
so down.
Okay. Well, we'll have to chat that through. But yeah, next year, that's where we're slated to go, or about this time next year. So
Oh
we'll
my
have to
gosh.
kind of see. And if you're down, then I'm down. We
That's
can make it a dual tour.
That is absolutely incredible. I'm looking over at a picture of Mother Mira, who my wife loves. She spent about a year in India in total. She and I actually bumped into each other as she was on her way. It's so crazy, our story,
Oh, wow.
but it's outlined in our book. But we met each other when we were just 8 years old, and had a crush on her in high school, and she wasn't into me. But 7 years later, I was on my way to Kathmandu, and I stopped in the Bangkok airport, and I was walking through this empty corridor at 7 a.m. No one was there except this gorgeous woman was walking toward me and smiling at me. I was thinking, wow, how nice, getting some female attention. And she stops me and says, Adam, it's me, Ori from high school. And I just was like jaw dropped. Like, what are you doing? She's like, I'm on my way to Calcutta to go hang out with, Mother Teresa and to learn some Aveda Vedanta up north and blah, 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 getting my doctorate in clinical psychology. And so was I at the time. And we didn't see each other for another 9 years after that. And we finally took the hint and went out on a date, and, got down on a knee very quickly to propose to her, because it did not take long for me to realize she was the one. But India is in the backdrop. That's a long way to a ham sandwich for me to tell you India is in our story as well.
Yeah, it's a place that has had my soul for a very long time, and I've spent quite a bit of time there, and we just yeah, we're very integrated into that culture. They're a huge part of our audience, so wonderful. We'll
That's
just
so
have to have that
cool.
conversation offline, but
Yeah, but where in
yes.
India? I have to ask you, Amber.
Oh, I've been all over. I've been to like 14 different areas within India for various reasons. And my master's degree is actually from a university in India. So, yes, I
That's incredible.
yeah. It's a lovely, lovely place.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
yeah, it's funny. I've been to Nepal, I've been to Bhutan, and I've never been to the great India.
Okay. Well, we'll just have to
It's
change that.
it's
We've
time.
got to change it.
It's time.
It is time. It is calling.
And it's calling, and I love the movies from India, so it's like, oh my gosh. And the music, oh, so good.
Right there. Now, I want to dive a little bit deeper into your background, like talking about psyche. I want to know the psyche of Dr. Adam Dorsay because immediately when you and I got on a call together, talk about connection, you have this warm,
Mm.
inviting personality. And I had actually heard about you before I ever met you
Mm.
from individuals that I knew from LA and from the tech industry because I was actually part of the .com before it went .boom way back in the day. But I still stayed in touch with a lot of people who were in tech. And I had heard about you from individuals, just like whispers about you from them. And there was always this resonance that was this individual truly, you can feel how much he cares, which makes me care. Where
Mm.
before I had kind of almost given up on caring.
Wow. That's a story unto itself.
And so, what creates a being like you, a person who has such a connection within yourself that resonates out to others? Because as you were talking about, connection has to start within you. Then it gets into your relationships with your family, with your career, with the world around you, which is a model that our nonprofit, Suivera, that's like our whole model. If you look on our website, that's what we built everything around. So to hear you echo it, to hear from other people that they feel it from you, that means it's actually built into your beingness, your psyche. So, how did you get there?
That's so great. Well, I love that question. I was born a connector. We are all born connectors. And yet, my mom describes pushing me in a stroller and saying she never saw a baby trying to connect with more people than she saw in me. And here's the cosmic joke. When I became verbal, I didn't know how to connect with people. In fact, I knew how to make people want to run the opposite direction. In second grade, I was so kind of socially tone deaf that my mom recalls watching me go through the list of all the boys in my class, inviting them over to play because we had phone numbers back then, and each one rejecting me. And my mom's heart just falling to the floor and just watching this kind of bumbling son. Unbeknownst to any of us, I had ADHD of the inattentive type, so I was often not paying attention. I was looking out the window, like Hans Christian Andersen describes, and I also had dyslexia and other learning disabilities. So it was an odd presentation. I presented rather intelligently on the basic tests that I would take, and I would be put in the gifted intelligent class, and I'd make my way down into special education. And even in special education, I performed worse than any other student in that class. So back then in late 70s, early 80s, the term that was no longer used, but I was called mentally retarded. And I basically marinated in that identity for multiple years, thinking, wow, I will never have a future. I will never get into college. I'm stupid. I'm I have a subpar intellect. And yet I had this massive hunger to connect. And my father very sweetly pulled me to the side of the road one time when we were in a car and said, Adam, you are in no way, shape, or form developmentally disabled. I'll use the term that's used today. Um, but the school is failing you. You are not. By that time, I'd already marinated in my identity, so that the damage had been done. But it was helpful to hear my father say that. Gave me a new insight. And I don't think I really came into my own until I was about 27. But in the meantime, due to this hunger to connect, I did find good friends along the way. I did find that having experienced such dire loneliness, that being connected with others gave me more joy than it might have given other folks, perhaps, who hadn't experienced that degree of loneliness, although many people have. And I found myself hungry to learn foreign languages and to connect with people from other cultures, because what could be cooler than finding out about the world through different words and different languages and different experiential uh, kind of modifiers. There are words that exist in Spanish. They don't say to taste something; they say to feel the taste, sentir el sabor. And in Japanese, there's this word, for example, natsukashi, which kind of means nostalgia, but more. And by learning these linguistic structures, I was able to have different felt senses of the world. Not to the degree of a native speaker, perhaps, but it certainly has informed my psyche in really exquisite ways. I spent about 3 years living in primarily Osaka, Japan, working there, and also as a student. And every day it felt like I was on some type of mind expanding drug, because it was so stimulating to be in this culture that was so different from my own. And I couldn't have been more excited to be there. It was just so much fun and so different. Here I am, like nearly 6'2", and a hairy Mediterranean male with very large shoes that when you take them off in the genkan, which is where you take off your shoes in the Japanese establishment or home, it was always kind of like, oh my gosh, look at those shoes. I clearly was not an obvious fit for the culture, but it stretched me. It stretched me, and I'm forever changed as a result, in a good way. So when I was 27, I was finally diagnosed with the ADHD that I'd been carrying all those years, and I took my first dose of Ritalin. I took it in the parking lot of Long's Drugs, and I didn't drive the car. I waited to see what would happen, and suddenly I had this feeling. It was as if my brain went from the off position to the on position. And my first thought was, oh my gosh, this is how people with regular brains feel. And I went to work that day, and I, kind of hit it out of the park. And then for the next 5 years, I put myself through my own curriculum of executive functioning coaching. Back then, that wasn't a term that we used, but I knew for sure that in my current state, I would not be a good husband. I would not be a good father. I needed to grow that brain. In the meantime, I had this cat. I hated cats before I had this cat, but a cat entered my life. Long story, but it's in the book. And he became like one of my prize relationships. And unbeknownst to me, had very severe medical conditions that required me to take care of him at a very, very high level, which also helped correct a lot of the ADHD. So by the time I turned 32, no one would have known that I had it. I'd put myself through all, including improv, by the way. Improv is a great place to go if you have ADHD. You learn how to focus in new ways. I'm a big fan of improv, but there were just so many things I threw at this whole ADHD experience. And by the time I re-met my wife at 34, she would never have known until she lived with me and she could see the little pile next to my bedside. But they're very small contexts in which my ADHD really presents itself. So I would say that has been, those have been some of the kind of burdens that I've carried. I remember in college, I was mentored by a fellow by the name of Dr. Alan Greenberger, who basically also helped turn my brain from the off position to the on position, and another mentor, a professional mentor, while I was doing these kind of ADHD acrobatics at 27 to a little bit above, Martin Dorner. Both of these men have sadly died, but the cat was named Yoda because I love the mentor archetype. And Martin and Alan are people I think about every day. I mean, these mentors who have made my life so much better by being a part of it. I aim to be a mentor to others and to pass it down, or pay it forward, as some people say. And I became a psychologist much later in life. I didn't have any faith that I could become a psychologist. I dropped out of graduate school after my first round, and I ended up marrying a psychologist. And I was in the corporate sphere, and I thought to myself, you know what? I'll find my meaning elsewhere. My profession will not be the place where I have meaning. And every day during dinner, my wife and I would debrief about our days, and she'd tell me about her day. And I think, damn damn, that was supposed to be my day, but I made my bed and I need to sleep in it. And I thought that was a very virtuous thing to say, except for the fact that it was not virtuous at all. It was compounding my sense of being a prisoner of my own, in a prison of my own creation. She said, honey, go back to school. And I'm like, honey, I made my bed. I need to sleep in it. And, I've already charted that course. And she said, she just kept on thwacking at me and saying, honey, I want a happy husband. I don't need to have a rich husband. Finally, it was my buddy Aaron who said to me over a Japanese dinner while I was crying into my sake. He was also a psychologist. He said, dude, you can still do it and your wife will have your back. And I said, oh my God, she will. So I went back to graduate school, nights and weekends, earned my doctorate, and tendered my resignation at 41 years of age. Had no for my postdoc, I was making $10 an hour with no benefits, working with gang affiliated youth. And for you do these 3,000 hours to sit for license, and working with gang affiliated youth was also magnificently informative. I mean, I love these kids. I still think about them, and they taught me more about some of the inner battles of being male than I could have learned anywhere else, because it was so raw. And whether I'm working with an executive or a physician or a professional athlete, these gang affiliated kids taught me so much about how to reach these so-called super successful men, because at their core, they're wounded adolescent or younger males in certain ways. So it's been a really fun experience. I didn't know what my specialty would be, and I just like the book, I believed it would present itself. I remember being at a networking party and somebody said, what's your specialty? And I said, I don't know, I guess humans with DNA. That's and she was not pleased. And
Well, you didn't have to please her. You had to do what you needed to do.
I wasn't there to please her, exactly. And a year later, I was able to tell her, okay, it looks like it's working with ostensibly highly successful men. And because an entire parade of these guys was coming to my office, and we worked brilliantly together. And subsequently, I ended up, being hired by Facebook to create a resiliency program for their counterterrorism team, their child safety team, known as their trust and safety department. And then the program went international, worked there for 4 years. And then I worked where I'm still working as the resiliency consultant at DigitalOcean. And it's just been a blast. That's all I can tell you. And I just can't wait for more adventures like those.
And first, thank you for being vulnerable enough to share all of that. Because what an inspirational story for others who right now may feel trapped by labels who have been placed on them. And you were willing to say, okay, yes, I had my moments of being trapped by labels, but I didn't have to stay there. And I had these opportunities that I created to remove those labels and create my own life's path instead of staying under the blanket of the labels that others had created for me.
Exactly. And I'm so grateful also to the therapists I've had throughout my life. Here is something so it's to this day, it still shocks me. When I was 11 years old, I saw Dr. Cohen. He was my therapist. He worked on the Alameda in San Jose. When I opened my first private practice office, it was 300 yards away from Dr. Cohen's office off the Alameda. What was that? And I actually got to have Dr. Cohen visit my office in just a beautiful bookend. So it's been a wonderful journey. I often describe myself as the hair club for men of therapists. I don't just treat anxiety, I suffer from it. If you remember, I think his name was Cy Streebling or something like that, the CEO of the Hair Club for Men. Do you remember that ad? I'm not just the president of Hair Club for Men, I'm also a member.
I'm a member.
Yeah, so that's kind of my motto with psychotherapy. I'm committed to doing my own psychotherapy. And I really do believe that it has given me a bi-directional benefit. So I've benefited by sitting in both sides of the room.
Yes. And I feel like that also creates a quick, instantaneous connection.
Hmm.
The one that I immediately felt with you too, because there is a distinct difference between someone who's walked the journey
Hmm.
and really can connect with the feeling of it, even if it's not the same. Sorry, I think I
Is that
have
a problem?
someone popping in.
That was funny. I like it.
Someone's connecting with the journey.
Come on.
Come
You're
on in.
magnetic. I mean, how can you help that?
But someone who can connect with that journey versus somebody who's learned and is really good at relaying information, but maybe has never felt that, right? And there's nothing wrong with either one of those, but there is that connection, that feeling that you get in that flow. So I just thank you for being willing to be vulnerable enough and say, hey, this is my journey. It didn't define me. Your journey doesn't have to define you. But if you choose for it to, that's okay too.
Yeah. Yeah. It's
So,
almost like some of us don't like the taste of chocolate. I don't understand how that's even in the realm of possibility, but I know many people who don't like chocolate. And it's as simple as that. We are all unique combinations of various features, including molecules and chemistry and physiology that make us us, including our psyches and so many mysterious elements. And one thing I know for sure is forcing ourselves to be something that we're not doesn't work. So many of us try to do that. And boy, it's as if we're walking through life with rocks in our shoe and expecting the walk to be nice and comfy. It's not. So we do need to find ways to be, true to ourselves, kind to ourselves, kind to others, ideally, along the way, and really self-compassionate as we go through it, and compassionate toward others. If we can do those ostensibly simple but not easy things, we're going to be way ahead of the game.
I love it. And one more time, Dr. Adam Dorsay, if you can share with the individuals as we're wrapping up how they can find your book, your podcast, all of that wonderful information. So it's the last thing they hear. That would be
Oh,
fantastic.
you betcha. Amazon or Barnes and Noble for the book. Podcast available on all platforms. Super Psyched with one word. Strangely, the book is called Super Psyched with two words. The publisher did not want to go with it being one word. And you can find me at dradamdorsay.com is my website, dradamdorsay.com. YouTube's got both of my TEDx talks, and available on most social media platforms except for TikTok and Twitter. I still call it Twitter. I don't call it X for some reason.
Awesome. And we will also make sure that all those links are in the write up and the summary wherever somebody is listening to or watching this. But it's also nice sometimes to hear it so that it's in there.
Right on. Right on.
Thank you so much
Oh,
for sharing your time, your wisdom, your heart with us. I am so grateful for you.
I'm grateful right back at you, Amber. It's so much fun to hang with you.